We're going to Claudine Herman, Titusville, Florida. Steve, congrats on another amazing guest. You seem to attract the cream of the crop. Keep up the good work. My question for Colette is, has she ever had a reading that has affected her personally, one that had an impact on her life?
Oh, my God, yes. Okay, so there's been a few, actually, and I wrote about them all in the first section of my book, Messages from Spirit. But I will tell you, John Holland, who befriended me when I did my first cruise with Sylvia Brown and John Holland. He's a Hay House author. He came to visit me a year later at my house, the weekend of the anniversary of my mother's death. Now, both parents died back-to-back, a year apart or 2 years apart, in February. But John didn't know any of this. Anyway, basically, he, in a nutshell, he connected to both my parents. And even though I do this, I've never been able to connect to their consciousness. And he had changed my life, especially because my father had come through, and he was an extraordinary man. I mean, he was he came to Canada with nothing after having everything overseas in Europe, and made a life for himself. And he was part of Environment Canada, and he spoke all over the world about windmill power and green energy in the 60s, and they thought he was, crazy, that we were going to run out of oil and all this stuff. He was an amazing man, but I got very stuck. My father in a bad business deal, lost all our family's money when he was 75 years old. He lost, and $2.25 million in the 80s was a lot of money. It's not like some Americans have lots more, but that's a lot. And my parents died paupers. And I was very stuck in what he was like at the end. He got Alzheimer's, and he drank, and it was just so sad to see what happened. But I forgot who he was, and John had no clue about all my dad's political stuff. He didn't know any of that. I never wrote about my dad in my book, so he didn't know. And he said all this stuff about my dad and how my dad wanted me to remember him in his tuxedo. And oh my God, I cannot tell you what that did for me. And then my mom coming in, it was like, really fast. I had found a letter my mother had written, and just before she died, and it started, "My darling Colette." So, and then out of the blue, after John connected with my dad, he said to me, when I got the letter, by the way, I had found it, and I was on my knees, and I started bawling. It was a month before John came. Anyway, John looks at me, and he said, "Your mother, dear Colette," he was writing this, and I'm like, "What are you writing?" And he said, "Your mother tells me that she was behind you when you found the letter." Yeah, that's what happened.
Wow.
So your answer is yes.
Wow.
That of all things just changed my life and brought such healing to me that it was wild. It was wild. John Holland, you should really check him out if she ever. And then there's been others, but I don't get a lot of readings. But when I have had them, they've been profound. And also my husband was described to me when I was like 14.
That's unbelievable. That's awesome. That's absolutely
in detail. And that's all in my book, by the way. All that stuff's in my Messages from Spirit.
Thanks, Claudine from Titusville, Florida. Listen, folks, we got a half hour left, and I refuse to take a commercial. So listen, Colette Baron Reid, her website is ColetteBaronReid.com. That's ColetteBaronReid.com. If that was too much for you, if you're listening on Empowered Living Radio, just click on the link that says Colette Baron Reid. It'll take you right to her site. Again, for all our Better Today stuff, visit abettertoday.com. We're going to keep going. You got another half hour in you?
Oh, yeah. Are you kidding?
Excellent. Okay.
I got all the time in the world for you, Steve.
Excellent. David McKendrick, Woodbury, Minnesota. Do you believe we live numerous lives in the flesh or just this one?
Okay. What do I believe? Well, okay. So I'm very good friends with Dr. Brian Weiss. As you know, he's the
Many Lives, Many Masters.
The past life specialist, as well as Denise Lynn. They're both reincarnation specialists, right? So I'm open. I believe that I have certainly gone into meditation and seen what I believe have been past lives. I'm in this one right now, and so that's what I know, I believe, because I'm in my body. But I'm very open to the concept of reincarnation. I would say that somehow, but here's the other thing to think about, and this is kind of a mind twister. If consciousness is what permeates all of life, right, and that right at this moment I have a personality and this consciousness is inhabiting this body, then since there is no such thing as nothing, wouldn't that be an accurate, that the consciousness would reform itself somehow anyway, so why wouldn't it be? Do you know what I mean? It's probably the only intelligent way I look at reincarnation, if using that consciousness model, it's like, well, okay, well, where do we go? If we can't go somewhere else, then we go into something else, and that we live something else out. There's so many ancient traditions that, especially the Buddhist and the Hindu tradition of reincarnation, where it really makes a lot of sense what they say and the karma of lives. But is time linear? So do we actually do this in a line? And I don't know that answer, but I'm open to the fact that, yes, I think it's very possible that we could live life over and over again.
Thank you, David, for listening from Woodbury, Minnesota. Jeff Friedman, Hartford, Connecticut. I'm somewhat intuitive, but I seem to be intuitive about people's past. How can working on my intuition help me and others plan for the future?
Well, the past is where you get information about where someone has been. So I think it's really key that you understand that's what archaeology is, right? So we go into the past and we dig and we find information, right? So the gems of the future, the potentiality of the future, can be seen in the lessons either learned from or not in the past. And retrocognition is what that's called, by the way, of knowing information about people's pasts. So what sounds counterintuitive, of course, is when you analyze the past and then we see what's possible for the future, because that's not really intuition. You're actually using your intellectual mind at that point, or your analytical mind. But in fact, your intuition, if you allow that, developing it is really just developing intuition means dropping the tight hold you have on your ego self. That centered, the self-centered self. So but the future is really to be planned in the now. So predicting the future, to be honest with you, even though it's something that I do, and I base certainly my reputation has been based on predictive accuracy, but really the now is the most important time we all have, and the now is where the future is created. So the past will give you information about the now, and the now is where you plan. And then you turn it over, and then you allow God's will, or whatever you want to call it, the universe, to take shape from your trajectory point. And that's what I have to say about that. Actually, I could say a lot more, but we only have half an hour.
That's right. Thank you, Jeff Friedman, Hartford, Connecticut.